Thank you very much for coming to the talk. I'm going to talk about how we can use PowerShell for practical purple teaming, not the stuff which was discussed in the talk. That talk you should watch after this one, because I'm not going to discuss how you can actually process the events once you connect them from a Windows box, let's say. So first, maybe after the conference, if you're trying to do to implement something really practical out of the talk, watch this one first, see how I just point you how you can collect some data, and then see the previous one, how you can actually do it on scale. With that, a couple of things about me. I'm a hacker, obviously. I train at various conferences, trained for past 3 days at f-k̒n. I speak at some of the conferences, spoken at many around the world. On Twitter, you can find me on this ID, Nikhil_MITT. So if you are on Twitter, please follow me. As I always say, I'm a sucker for Twitter followers. So please do that. I blog regularly on labofapenetrationtester.com. That's my home on the internet. I maintain 2 open source toolkits for red teamers, penetration testers, hackers, whatever you want to say, Kautilya and Nishang. Kautilya is useful for using human interface devices for offensive security, penetration testing, to break into boxes where, of course, you have the permission to do so. Nishang is a tool which is a collection of PowerShell scripts which you can use in different phases of a penetration test. I'm generally interested in new ways of breaking into boxes, once again, where I have permission to do so. I've previously spoken at DEF CON, Black Hat, Troopers, ShakerCon, and few more conferences. So what we are going to discuss today is what traditional red teaming was. Of course, you must have seen some of these things already from the morning. Why purple teaming is a bit better than traditional red teaming, what purple teaming is actually, why we would like to use PowerShell for different things. Then couple of stories I would take to you through purple teaming stories with live demonstrations. Hopefully that would be the more interesting part. And then how we can implement purple teaming, or just a brainstorming how purple teaming can be done with an external red team as well. So the traditional red teaming has an adversarial nature. That is, it has been red versus blue. You need a result, who won, red won or blue won. I have been into engagements where there have been actually tracks or metrics of the points scored, who scored more points, and that is where the adversarial nature, the red versus blue narrative, comes in. Also, what a traditional red teaming is, of course, I'm in no way against traditional red teaming. That's my bread and butter as well. But in traditional red teaming, what we see generally is it is focused on stealth. The goal is for red team is not to get caught, which is perfectly fine. If we are trying to simulate a real adversary, the best way is to not to get caught, maybe for like 10 years, or maybe 4 years, 2 months, 1 week, depends on the length of the red team engagement. Of course, there has been no red team engagement in my knowledge where you're allowed to reside inside an environment for 10 years, but real attackers do. There have been cases of technology companies, if you can guess what I'm talking about, who were pwned for let's say for a decade, and they don't know it. Because of this focus on stealth, many red teamers do not want to share their methods, their technologies, their techniques with blue teams, which makes sense. Of course, even I don't share it with the clients unless it is specifically asked. That's something we spend weekends, nights to develop tools and things. Of course, if those are not open source, that's something which we develop. That's our intellectual property. Similarly, many blue teamers avoid discussing their detection methodologies, techniques with red teams. Once again, that makes sense as well. Traditional red teaming is adversarial in nature once again. red versus blue, a boxing match. The result may be a knockdown, or after 4 rounds, who won, the matrix is in the same way. Also, this which I did at the last moment in the slide, I've seen it a lot of times, face this problem myself as well. Red teamers generally do not have access to the enterprise grade tools which blue teamers have access to. Let's say a multi-million-dollar SIEM device, which may or may not be useful depending on how you configure it, but still having the ability to correlate events, things, it may or may not be possible for a red teamer to have access to that. Specifically for a freelancer like me, I rely more on open source or maybe just some tools. In such cases, it is always advised if you can just make your red and blue team work together. Now, what and or how purple teaming can help in such a scenario? Once again, there are different goals for a penetration test, or a red teaming, or a purple teaming. So, do not think of it as a Venn diagram intersecting somewhere. It is not at all that. The goals of all these exercises is completely different. So, what is purple teaming? It's not red versus blue, it's red and blue. So, for me, I should admit that it's been just like an year or so. When I started doing this thing, there were presentations by, I think, I know if Chris Gates is here or not. He was supposed to do a presentation with Mubix. So, I saw that presentation, got queries from some of my clients. If you can do something like this, I tried it with few clients, did like not more than 10 engagements up to now for purple teaming. How I did that was sitting with their blue team, more of it in a training setup. Instead of using my lab access, which I use in my training classes, we use their live network, of course, with the permission and all that, and do it in the training format. That is to work together to improve the security, not just to score points. The focus is on detection. That's what is the major difference between a red and a purple assessment is. You must get caught. I directly quote Chris here. The focus is on assessing detection and response mechanisms, that is getting caught, and training of red and blue teams. If you get caught, red team need to improve their tools and techniques. If you don't get caught, then blue team needs to improve their detection mechanisms. And why detection and prevention? Because that's proactive. It's not something like you got hacked and then you try to find out who was the attacker. This was the CNC, or probably a nation actor or something like that. Try to do it before you got hacked. And later on, when we discuss the assume breach methodology, which is used by Microsoft's Cloud Red Team Security, we will see that it is always better to assume that you are already hacked. There is an adversary living in your environment, and in that case, purple teaming helps even more. Once again, if attacks are successful, train blue team. If attacks fail, train red team. Improvement for both of us. Also, red team gets to see the monitoring, detection, and response mechanisms. I never knew before doing a purple teaming environment that there is something like time-based log correlation, wherein blue teams can actually create a complete timeline of my attack using automated tools. Never knew that. Similarly, blue team gets to see how we can run. Let's say my clients always, when I used to use PowerShell in my red team engagements, during my closure meetings, my clients would always recommend blocking, let's say, PowerShell.exe. Of course, that doesn't help. Those of you who have used PowerShell in red team engagements would know that blocking PowerShell.exe is not a solution at all. It's just a snake oil. So that my clients' blue teams get to know with the help of my knowledge or what I know. Now, why PowerShell? Of course, how many of you actually use PowerShell for red or blue? Many, not many still. Oh, I got a big hand over there. So, PowerShell, because it is available by default in modern Windows operating system, post Windows Vista, in all Windows operating systems, 7, 8, 8.1, 10, 2008, 12, 16, in all of these, even Windows IoT Core, you will have PowerShell present, and that makes it really useful. With upgrade to PowerShell version 5, the detection capabilities have been enhanced a lot. It provides you access to WMI, Windows API. So, WMI is an alternate object system. It still provides you access to that. COM objects. So, COM, if you are really up to date with latest threat vectors, you may like to see talks by, let's say, Casey Smith, who works a lot on COM objects. And that dude basically tweets whitelisting bypass every second minute. So, PowerShell, once again, PowerShell provides access not only to these things, to registry, other boxes on the network. PowerShell Remoting provides you the ability to interact with other boxes on the network if you have administrative credentials. It is based on .NET framework, which means you can extend its capability if something is not available in PowerShell by default. So, why red team would use PowerShell? Those of who you do red teaming or even penetration testing and are not using this, ability to execute attacks without touching disk, and that is something which is built in PowerShell. Sounds really easy to do. It's hard to do without having tools like PowerShell at your disposal. Script-based attacks. That means if you use PowerShell scripts, specifically not the frameworks and single scripts, the chances of detection are really low. It is this easy to change signature for your script, and you can avoid detection for a really long time. Plenty of open source attack tools. This is the hard thing when it comes to attackers. You may need not write anything. If you just maybe look up on the internet for something, if it can be done with the help of PowerShell, something nasty, something for offensive security, there may be already a script or framework which has that thing. And capability to avoid or bypass detection mechanisms. I think we will have a look at this thing live. Why would blue team use it? Once again, ability to execute monitoring and detection scripts without installing agents. Agent installation is something which creeps up whenever you discuss detection mechanisms. With the fabulous performance of many antivirus vendors to get owned while running a system on different boxes with the data protection mechanisms getting owned with their agents, agent installation is something which always comes up when we discuss defense mechanisms or techniques. The ability to run agentless detection mechanisms with the help of anyone? WMI, maybe? You can easily access WMI with PowerShell with just 4 commandlets. And the ability to use that WMI stuff for agentless detection mechanisms makes PowerShell really, really useful when it comes to blue teams. I think it's not in the slides, but tools like from the guys from Mandiant, WMI IDS, an intrusion detection system, not tried it yet. I don't know if it works in a production environment or not, but tool like WMI IDS, based completely on WMI with agentless detection mechanisms, that could be really, really helpful for blue teams. Not only that, if you've ever used PowerShell remoting, let's say for lateral movement, things like invoke command, which is a commandlet in PowerShell to execute stuff on different boxes, that allows you to scale. So a thing about invoke command, that commandlet allows you to execute scripts and commands on, let's say, 10,000 boxes parallelly. That's a built-in feature. Why that is not useful for a blue team guy? Of course it is. I mean, you can run your detection scripts, schedule a job, a partial job maybe on your domain controller somewhere, run a simple detection script or a baselining script every half an hour or an hour on all of your boxes parallelly without having really any overhead on the performance. Another thing which I would like to mention here is, which I started with actually, blocking PowerShell.exe. I have been into meetings or closure meetings, discussions, etc., where PowerShell.exe is considered, or PowerShell itself is considered the evil, something which has been unleashed on the world and it will consume it all. It's not that thing. In fact, if you're, well, as a red teamer who has been doing things, these things for past 9 years, I can assure you that I can bet my life on it. If you have PowerShell version 5 installed on your boxes, the chances of detection of an attacker on your box increases multifold. It is really, really, really hard not to leave a trace if you have PowerShell version 5 installed with its enhanced logging capabilities. And of course, if you are managing your logs perfectly, as discussed in the last talk, you are forwarding things to a central log system monitoring things. Of course, if no one is monitoring the logs, logging anything is useless. So if you have PowerShell version 5 installed, enhanced logging capabilities like system-wide transcripts, suspicious script block logging, couple that with the elephant in the room which no one wants to address, process creation, logs. If you have all these 3 things set up, it's really, really hard not to leave a trace. Any attacker will leave a trace somewhere. Of course, if you still find ways to silently do things after this, that's what purple teaming is for, come up with new ways of detection. Then there are plenty of open source detection and response tools when it comes to blue team as well. Some of which I can quote at the top of my head. CONSA, it's an IR incident response framework. POSHSEC, Power Forensics, Invoke IR. All these are open source PowerShell tools which you can use for incident response, baselining, auditing, and whatnot. Also, if you are specifically threatened by PowerShell, the name PowerShell itself, then you can then you have the capability to really run PowerShell in a constraint mode. Maybe try application whitelisting. It can of course be bypassed, but at least it adds a cost to the attacker. So that's what red and blue should use, or they use PowerShell. Why should purple use it, or a purple team? The ability to demonstrate and detect real attacks, as we will see, and as at least I have been doing, I do purple teaming engagements in a training format. So PowerShell allows me to detect, not only execute attacks, but detect them in real time. And also not only on a single box or on 100 boxes, using, let's say, PowerShell Remoting or the capabilities which come up with WMI, maybe on 10,000 boxes at a time. Once again, plenty of open source attack, detection, and response tools and techniques available. So I think that would be enough of theory. What's the first story, or what the first attack which we are going to have a look at? We'll start as a normal non-local admin domain user. That is a normal domain user with no local admin rights. Look for a local admin access. So pretty much run-of-the-mill user hunting. Look for a DA token. Once we find a DA token, use that, escalate privileges, create maybe a golden ticket, use that golden ticket later on, and exfiltrate interesting stuff. If we start with a domain user access, is that something which we are making up? Nope. I would like you to read this cloud red teaming paper from Microsoft. Very, very good if you are into red teaming at all. It details the assumed breach methodology, and this line I think sums up, it is more likely that an organization has already been compromised, and I'm quoting the paper here, but just hasn't discovered it yet. And but that is actually a nice thing to begin with. 3 things which we are going to talk about shortly, of course, because there is not enough time, I believe. Red teaming, insider attack simulation, and blue teaming in the talk. When we talk about insider threat simulation, of course, an insider would at some point would have at least normal domain user privileges so that they can log into a box and do their stuff, whatever they want to. So we start with that, not discussing assume rich anymore. So we will look for local admin access. So we already have normal domain user access. Do you think it's really easy? Too easy? Does anyone think that having normal domain user access makes it too easy? If you think that, go back to the previous talk. See, where it was a very interesting talk. See how you can get that, or maybe, for example, I always like to quote this example. I did a rat teaming 6 years back, maybe, for a German oncology back there in New Delhi, and I used to work for a company. Right now, I'm independent. I used to work for a company at that time, and we were made to sit inside a conference room without any network port at all. So it was a long engagement, 2 or 3 months, but still without network access. I mean, you cannot. There was no Wi-Fi, only cable network, and we were supposed to break into that company without any network access. And at that time, I got started with this human interface device thing. You can program devices, throw them into parking lot, maybe leave at reception, cafeteria, sell them to, mail them to employees. There will be connections, and that's how I actually got into that environment. So that's another example of getting a normal domain user access. Client-side attacks, maybe. People just love to open attachments which strangers from the internet send them. So maybe try that as well. With all that, we can safely assume that we have a normal domain user level access. Now, what our next step is to hunt for local admin or escalate our privileges locally. Now, when it comes to a domain environment, the most interesting thing is it's a shit box. You really don't know where you may have a local admin privilege or the user. Let's say you get this normal domain user access with a client-side attack. It is always possible that the user is not a local admin on the current box, but if it's a reasonably big domain, let's say even more than 1K boxes, there are chances that there would be some box lying in the domain where that user would be a local admin. If not, you may try local privilege escalation as well. There are always services ready to be hijacked. And how would you do that? Of course, PowerView, the tool which made it possible for everyone to do user hunting. We are going to use PowerView, of course, written in PowerShell, to find access, find local admin access on one of the boxes in our domain. So this is the box which we are going to use for different attacks. And what I'm going to do here, I'm going to load. Is this visible? Yeah, thank you. Now we are going to run find. Oops. Let's run it with verbosity. I've been using the same lab for my training for past 3 days. So those of my students sitting here will identify some of the boxes. So we have actually local admin access on a number of boxes. That's fine, but please note one thing here, that the script identified that there are total number of 43 boxes in the domain, and then it approached each and every one box. Don't you think that that is something really nicey? Makes some logs probably. So we'll come back to that. Right now, the box I am interested in is this one. Although the attack is quite scripted, but many times the name of the box, the NetBIOS name of the box is enough to tell you interesting things. So once we have identified a box where we may have local admin access, let's see what kind of logs are activity generated. On all the boxes where it was not successful, you will see event 4624, a successful log on, and 4634 log off from the user on this box, which is lab user. So in case someone runs this, reads up it on the internet, so this is how many times people do the stuff. Their Metasploit payloads are getting detected. They move quickly to PowerShell, found out the PowerView is awesome for user hunting, ran find local admin access, and the user ID. These logs, if you have seen it, I'm quite sure many of you have, they do log a user ID. So maybe on 1,000 boxes of your domain, you will have these two events, 4624 and 34 from a particular username. That's a dead giveaway. I mean, if you cannot, you should develop the capability to detect that. In cases of successful login, because we are looking for local admin access, in cases of success, there would be event 4672 admin logon on those boxes where this user is a local admin. And how can you read it with PowerShell? I mean, there are so many tools written in PowerShell which can do it easily for you. But if you just want simple one-line PowerShell command, then you can do this to list the latest event, let's say, to related to event ID 4672 from the security log of the box. How would you do it on scale? Maybe use PowerShell Remoting, use invoke command, the script block, pass to it the list of servers you want to run it on, and it would do it parallelly on those n number of boxes. You can also, for example, if you have all the organizations do have older boxes which are there for backward compatibility, XP 2003 or even earlier, then you can use WMI classes, these ones, to do the same thing once again using PowerShell. If just because I mentioned it, even if you run WMI queries from a PowerShell instance on your box, PowerShell need not be installed on the remote box. It's just plain WMI if you use WMI. So once we identify that we have local admin access, we can use something like this. So the box was ops-terminal ser. Let's run enter ps session, which provides you a one-to-one PowerShell remoting session with the box running PowerShell remoting. So if you see here, you are still lab user, but on a different box now. It's that simple. Once you have, please keep in mind that we need administrative privileges by default to do that. Once this is done, then we are going to use, once it is confirmed that yes, we indeed have administrative access, the next step is to get some credentials which provides us interesting things. And we'll use Mimikatz for that. So I always say that there, if we talk about at least the threat landscape when it comes to red teamers or red team techniques, there are two eras. One was before Mimikatz and one is after Mimikatz. So no engagement, at least for me, no engagement at some point of time, bearing 1 or 2 is where I use Mimikatz, and not actually for pulling credentials in clear text. That's so 2012. It's been useful for many more things now. So let's run Mimikatz onto the target box, and here you can see the interesting thing is not the ability to run Mimikatz on a target box. The interesting thing here is we are using PowerShell remoting. Mimikatz, invoke Mimikatz uses PowerShell remoting in the background. That means if you have process creation logs, you are collecting process creation logs on the target box, you will see WSMprov host, the service or the executable which PowerShell remoting uses, and not PowerShell.exe at all. So let's have a look at that. If we go to this box and try to see logs for process creation, let's see what we can see. The security logs. Would be something like this. a WSM Prav host, not PowerShell.exe. What actually helps here is, maybe I'll come back to it in a moment. There is something which helps here. Do not get disheartened. So, unless you have PowerShell version 5 and enhanced logging capabilities, there would be actually no really interesting logs, as you can see, even with process creation logs, with command line auditing enabled. What we need here is things like system-wide transcripts, script block logging, because the reality of today's threat landscape is you have so many script-based tools out there that it really helps if you can pinpoint on script-based attacks. Frankly, if you ask me, it is easier to bypass a countermeasure while if you use an executable and not a script-based attack, but they are so easy to execute, it's almost addicting. So, what we are going to do on this box, I have PowerShell version 5 installed and some of the logging capabilities enabled. So, first of all, let's have a look at if we have any malicious script block logging which goes to PowerShell operational. So, although this is quite scattered, those of you who have seen source of Mimikatz will know that this comes from invoke Mimikatz. These all logs, these are almost 100 of log entries. So, what enhanced script block logging does, if it thinks that a script block, a PowerShell script block is suspicious or malicious, it is logged into the PowerShell operational logs. That means you may have a complete script in here, deobfuscated, decrypted, whatever. That's your free deobfuscator right here. Whatever stuff you pass on to a PowerShell scripting host gets logged in here if it is assumed malicious. In case you are using obfuscation, it's almost sure. And I think we have the god of obfuscation here in the room. So, pardon me if I used obfuscation wrong by any chance. So, if you use any sort of obfuscation, your script, unless you are Daniel, your script will be visible right here. So, not only that, the thing which helps most here is this. If you have system-wide transcripts enabled, you will have something like this. Of course, please make sure that your transcripts are forwarded to a SIEM device or a central log management system. What this transcript says that a user, lab user, on this machine executed this process, WSM Prav host, and what that script does, it runs this script, which is invoke Mimikatz, source code of invoke Mimikatz, and what it did was, if it is visible over here, the result was this. This tool was executed on your box, and your credentials or hashes or whatever were visible to this guy. So, that's what system-wide transcripts do. Of course, if you can forward these things to a device which manages your logs and can create some correlation rules out of this, it would be really helpful. Now, we saw that in case we ran invoke Mimikatz, the most useful thing was system-wide transcripts. I saw this already. Now, what the next step is to look for domain admin. Although I personally, in my engagements, I do not go after domain admin specifically since the time Microsoft ATA has come on to in the scene, and we'll discuss that as well, I believe. But still, let's go for a DA because that's many of us do in a real world engagement. Leaving the talk aside, I would suggest you not to do that, not to go for DA immediately as soon as you got a local admin access, because that's really noisy. Maybe stick to your goals, go after client's IP, or employee data, or whatever the goal of your engagement is. But once you think that it is the best way to go for, let's try how we can do that. So what we have done up to now is we have admin access to a box. We have hashes of a local admin, which was term admin, which I have actually copied already so that things are a bit fast. So what we are going to do now, using hashes, NTLM hashes of that user, we are going to create a PowerShell process with the privileges of that user, this thing. The new PowerShell process which opens up has the privileges of term admin, the administrator on that remote box. What we are going to do now is try to look for a domain admin from this thing. So now I'm so used to load Mimikatz every second that it's even not required. So let's run invoke user hunter. What invoke user hunter does, it looks for, let's not run it with verbosity. It looks for a token of domain admin on any of the boxes. It can do it on all the boxes. Success would be shown only on those boxes where you have local admin rights as well. That is, it will find for a box, look for a box where a domain admin is logged in and you have local admin rights, so that you can reuse the token of domain admin. It is true for this box. So as you might have guessed, once we have something like this, it's really easy to escalate our privileges to domain admin. But there is something which comes in when you do things like this. Of course, regular logs. And I have been looking at this thing being used increasingly in enterprise environments. Microsoft ATA, Advanced Threat Analytics, they bought up a behavioral analysis company a few years back, 2 or 3 years back. And this tool is my, personally for me, this is my latest nightmare. How ATA works is, and I'm not endorsing it, I mean, this is fantastic tool and Microsoft is not as evil as it used to be, but still I'm not endorsing it. Try it on with your own risk. How ATA works is it looks for whatever traffic you are sending to the DC. In my lab, it is a light gateway installed on the DC itself, or you may have a sensor which sends whatever traffic is being sent to the DC to ATA's gateway. It looks for anomalies, like if you are using, let's say, NTLM authentication, because Kerberos is the default one in a domain environment. Or if one of your users used to log in only at 10 in the morning and logs out at 4 in the evening, but today for some weird reason that user logs in at 11 in the night, even that thing it claims gets detected. So there are a lot of claims, a lot of avoidance, a lot of bypasses. In fact, if you are interested in ATA, and here's a chance for me to for some shameless self-promotion, visit my blog. I blogged how you can avoid ATA last month. That is, so the blog was, if you stay on the database layer, do not interact with the DC at all. This bastard works only on DC, doesn't monitor any other server. That said, this is our user hunting. It gets detected as recon using SMB session enumeration, which doesn't make things really easy as they look like. Assuming that we got past that thing, it was marked as, let's say, a false positive or no one is looking at it. In such a case, if we escalate our privileges to domain admin, how we are doing that? Once again, now we run Mimikatz onto the OPS file where a domain admin was logged in. We pulled hashes of a domain admin, so an assumption that we know that this guy is a domain admin. We start a PowerShell process with the privileges of that user, who would be domain admin. Looks easy, looks silent, but it is not. Once again, ATA will kick in, and interestingly, it can point out to the exact name of the attack, the hacker lingo. It's overpassed the hash attack. That is, you are using an NTLM hash to create a Kerberos ticket. How it does that? because generally in case of a normal ticket, a normal TGT, the timestamp which you encrypt with your NTLM hash to authenticate to the KDC is not done using NTLM. That's what it checks for here and shows an alert. Once we are DA, the next thing which we can do is execute stuff on the domain controller and persist on it. How we can do that? By getting maybe the hash of the Kirby TGT account, which we can use to create a golden ticket later on. When you create a golden ticket, that's perfectly fine. Of course, when you execute stuff on the domain controller, it's not always. So does anyone of you can anyone of you tell me if there is a replacement for the first step? Instead of executing Mimikatz onto the domain controller, is there another way of remotely pulling hashes from the DC? Maybe DC sync. So you pose as a domain controller, tell the domain controller that I am a domain controller as well. Please sync with me, send me all the hashes, and it sends the hashes to you. You can use that as well. In any case, once you get hashes for the Kirby TGT account, which is this in our lab case, once you do that, you can create a golden ticket later on, which generally in my cases I have seen working for at least 6 months, 2 months, 3 months. It depends on the environment which you are targeting. Creating a golden ticket does not necessarily create any logs, because you are doing it on your own box. Of course, if someone looks or does forensically investigate your box later on, it would be visible, but doesn't do that in any other case. What if you use it? Same logs, successful admin log on, log off, etc. And once again ATA. Why I keep coming back to ATA? Frankly, I've never seen anything which detects attacks like this so quickly and effectively. Of course, it has its own flaws, but your golden ticket may get detected as well, which doesn't make things really good if you're a red teamer. Of course, why I am another reason why I keep coming back to this, because this is something which blue guys can use. Of course, an expensive tool, but really useful. Now, there are many ways of exfiltration. My favorite is to use Gmail. You can once again use PowerShell to exfiltrate things to Gmail. What I am doing here, in case, depending on the environment, if you exfiltrate, let's say 10 GBs or 100 GBs of data, that may get detected. If someone asks me that if there is a single thing I want to exfiltrate from an environment, that would be the hash of the Kirby TGT account. So that's how do we exfiltrate it using Gmail. Chances of detection, if you have a deep packet inspection setup which looks at even Gmail, I have seen where environments where HTTPS is intercepted, but things like Gmail, Google Docs, etc. are not. So you may like to do that as well. Time? Oops. Oh, 2 minutes. So if you want to exfiltrate a huge chunk of data, maybe go for FTP, Dropbox, Google Drive maybe. So that's story one. Another one is to start as once again non-local admin domain user. Maybe use client-side attack with PowerShell.exe, which is blocked with whitelisting. How we can do that? Maybe use HTA. So if you use HTA, you will see something like this. Even if you have explicitly blocked PowerShell, you will still see something like this. If I have that right now. So this is when you run PowerShell.exe without HTA, and this is when you run it with HTA. Even if you have explicitly blocked PowerShell, it will still be allowed. So there are so many ways to actually bypass application whitelisting. Once again, what helps here is system-wide transcripts. For example, if PowerShell.exe is blocked, removed, you can still use something like MS build to rerun it. Even if you do it with MS build, transcripts, system-wide transcripts will still log each and everything. So it helps. You can use ICMP, HTTPS, DNS shells out of raw TCP or UDP, which are some of the lesser monitored protocols. There are ready to use shells in Nishang and in other tools for that, or maybe just use Empire, which has its own implementation of encrypted communications. Let me quickly go through the random PowerShell things. One of the very interesting attacks is to downgrade to PowerShell version 2. That's called the PowerShell downgrade attack. That is, even if your environment has PowerShell version 5 installed, someone may just run PowerShell version 2 and remove effectively MZ, the anti-malware scan interface, enhanced login capabilities, etc. Although not enabled by default on Windows 10, you can install an older .NET version and still do it. How do we defend against things like this? Lee Holmes, one of the architects of PowerShell, blogged about this. Whenever you run a PowerShell event or script, in Windows PowerShell log, you will see event ID 400, which quotes engine version. So if you do not absolutely want PowerShell to be executed in your environment, this should be a security alert as soon as someone runs PowerShell version 2. Yes, if PowerShell.exe is blocked, so I had a demonstration for this as well, but you can imagine what happens. It just pops open PowerShell even if you block it already. Once again, system-wide transcripts to the rescue. If you have MZ enabled, MZ detects PowerShell, VB script, JScript code from memory. If you want to avoid that, you can do that as well. So attack its detection, attack which can disable it, and that is what purple teaming is about. If you introduce a new detection mechanism, the red team should try to avoid it. As soon as the red team tries to bypass it, for example, this one was tweeted by Matt, the guy who wrote PowerSploit, still an event ID is generated. So maybe look for that event ID as well. Defense, attack, defense, keep doing that. As a freelancer, how I go ahead with purple teaming, as I said in the beginning, I do it more in the form of a training scenario. Or maybe 3 or 4 guys of the client's blue team or maybe red team will sit with me, and we do it together in form of a training. That's how I've been doing purple teaming. And there is actually a valid reason of not doing it with external red team, the adversarial nature, that is, okay, why should I share my techniques with my client's blue team? That makes sense. And that is why most purple teaming engagements are not done with an external red team. But external red component in a purple team provides new techniques, new perspective. So please do not kick us freelancers out. We are much more into the purple teaming scenario. Some of the references, good reads on purple teaming if you want to read. So to conclude, purple team aims to bring red and blue together. So not red versus blue, but red and blue, so that the benefits for security are maximized. Doesn't mean an add to red teaming. Both have different goals, of course. Red teaming has its own thing. And structural and cultural work cultural changes are really required to create an effective purple team. And that would be it from me.